My name is Anna Romano. I am 38 years old. There are days when I wake up and forget my age. Then I look in the mirror and see it not in wrinkles, but in my eyes. Eyes that have waited. Eyes that have lost. Eyes that learned too early that love does not always stay. I was born in Italy near Florence, in a quiet neighborhood where life moved slowly and people greeted each other by name. My childhood was not rich, but it was warm. My parents were simple people. They didn't have much, but they gave me everything they had. My mother used to wake me every morning by sitting on the edge of my bed. She never rushed. She would brush my hair gently, humming old Italian songs, telling me stories about her childhood. My father made coffee so strong it filled the whole house with its smell. Before leaving for work, he kissed my forehead and said, "Be brave today, Anna." At 9 years old, I believed bravery meant not being afraid of the dark. I didn't know it would later mean surviving loss. 2 weeks after my 10th birthday, my parents didn't come home. It was a foggy evening, the kind of fog that swallows roads and hides danger. A car accident. That's all people said. Just two words that destroyed an entire world. I remember the sound of the doorbell. I remember my name being spoken slowly. I remember my mother's scarf, still hanging near the door. I waited for them for days. Children don't understand death. We understand absence. At the funeral, people touched my head and told me I was strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like someone had taken my future and folded it into a small, quiet pain inside my chest. After that, I stopped dreaming loudly. At 15, I moved to Rome to live with my aunt. She was not cruel, just distant. Love, in her house, was practical. Food on the table, clothes washed, school fees paid. No hugs, no long talks, no questions about feelings. So I learned to keep mine hidden. At school, I smiled. I got good grades. Teachers said I was mature for my age. What they really meant was that I didn't cause trouble. At 18, I watched my friends fall in love. I watched them cry over text messages, laugh over phone calls, plan futures with boys who promised everything. I told myself I didn't need that. But at night, alone in my room, I wondered what it felt like to be chosen. At 22, I found work in a small bookstore near Trastevere. It was old, quiet, and smelled like paper and dust. I loved it immediately. Books stayed. Books waited. Books didn't die suddenly. Every evening, I closed the shop alone and walked home through narrow streets, listening to footsteps behind me, wondering if one day someone would walk beside me instead. I didn't know then that life was already preparing someone who would change me quietly. I first noticed Luca Bianchi on a Thursday evening. He stood near the poetry section, holding a book like it was something fragile. He was 31 years old, taller than most men, with tired eyes that looked older than his face. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it felt honest. He came to the bookstore every day at exactly 6:40 p.m. At first, we didn't talk. He would read a few pages, close the book carefully, and put it back in the same place. Always the same shelf. Always quietly. One evening, curiosity won. "You never buy anything," I said, trying to sound casual. He looked at me, surprised, then smiled softly. Some things are meant to be felt, not owned. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. We began talking slowly. about books, about Rome, about silence. He told me he worked in architecture but hated offices. I told him I like watching people from the bookstore window, imagining their lives. Weeks passed. One night, while closing the shop, rain started falling hard. The streets emptied. Luca stayed. I don't like going home when it rains, he said. Why? I asked. Because rain reminds me of endings. That was when he told me about Julia. She was his wife. She was 29. She died suddenly from a heart condition. He found her on the floor of their apartment, still wearing his shirt. I didn't say goodbye properly, he said quietly. So now I avoid beginnings. I was 24 years old, standing in front of a man whose heart had already been broken beyond repair. And still, I fell in love with him. Not because I wanted to fix him, but because he never pretended to be whole. We never rushed into anything. Our love grew like morning light, slow, gentle, undeniable. Coffee at dawn, walks along the river, long silences that felt warm instead of empty. Sometimes he held my hand like he was afraid it would disappear. I loved him in the way people love when they know love can be taken away. At 27, Luca told me he was leaving for Milan. A better job, a new life. You deserve more than a man who lives in the past, he said. I didn't cry in front of him. The last thing he did was kiss my forehead and whisper, "Some people meet too late." That night, I cried until my chest hurt. And I learned that loving someone doesn't mean they'll stay. At 28, I moved to Naples because Rome held too many memories. Naples was loud, messy, alive. That's where Daniele Ferraro entered my life. He was 33, divorced, emotional, and full of contradictions. He laughed loudly, argued passionately, and loved recklessly. With Daniele, love was fire. We fought, we made up, we stayed awake until sunrise talking about dreams and regrets. He kissed like he was afraid tomorrow wouldn't come. At 30, we moved in together. At 31, he admitted he wasn't done loving his past. I don't want to hurt you, he said. But some people hurt you by staying too long when they should leave sooner. When he left, the silence was louder than Luca's absence. At 32, I told myself I was done with love. Then came Matteo Rossi. He was 41, calm, responsible, kind. He made plans. He spoke about the future with certainty. He offered safety. At 34, he proposed. At 35, I said no, because love without feeling is just survival. Now I am 38 years old. I live in Venice, surrounded by water that reminds me everything moves, even pain. I wake up alone. I drink coffee alone. And yet, I am not empty. I love Luca. I love Daniele. I almost love Matteo. Different men. Different ages. Same truth. I was never unlovable. I was just loved in temporary ways. And now I understand something I didn't before. Not everyone gets forever. Some of us get moments that change us. Some of us get memories that teach us. Some of us get stories instead of endings. And that has to be enough. If you stayed until the end of this story, thank you. Not for listening, but for feeling. Because stories like mine don't ask for pity. They ask to be understood. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means more than you know. See you in the next story.